Hello, everybody. This is John Hernandez, and I'm a licensed tax resolution professional. I've helped business taxpayers save thousands of dollars when facing the IRS. And today I have 3 essential steps that you need to know if you're going to be handling IRS notices. All right, so again, this goes for any person out there who owns a business that has received an IRS notice. So these are 3 steps that, if you follow, can really help you save a lot of heartache and really help you through those steps. So step number 1, and this may seem like a given, but what it is you want to read the notice carefully. You want to understand what the issue is. And I said that this sounds like a given because in my 10 years working as a tax professional, I've seen that this is actually one of the biggest pitfalls where, the taxpayer gets the IRS letter and it's like, panic ensues, and it's like, you just put that letter in a drawer and forget that it's there, right? But that's the worst thing that you can do. And let me repeat that. Not opening the letter, not taking the time to read it and understand it is the worst thing you can do, because that's only going to make the matter so much worse. I've seen situations where the IRS notice itself maybe was a small amount or really wasn't, initially something too serious, but because of, the individual, the business owner, didn't read it, didn't bother to take a look at it or just even forgot about it, then, really it snowballed into something so much worse, right? And if you ignore the IRS, that's the worst thing you can do, because then the IRS can come, take more aggressive collection action. They can put liens on your property. They can seize your bank accounts. They can, put a levy on your merchant account. So anyways, they can really hurt your business. So step number 1 is going to be open the notice promptly, right? Number 2, identify the type of notice, right? There's so many different type of notices that the IRS can send you, generally speaking, there's so many notices from CP 2000 to CP 1628, right? And frankly, it's so much. But actually understanding, what it is, reading through it, the IRS fortunately, uses plain English, right? They put a lot of detail. They give you numbers like, hey, if this is a penalty, this is what it's owed, what is the period, why are they giving you the penalty? The IRS does a pretty good job of identifying this. But again, you as the recipient of the notice really needs to take that step to actually read it carefully and understand what the issue is. What does the IRS want? Okay. Step number 2 is going to be, really, I want to segment this into 2 different forms. So the first step, or not the first step, but the first part of this is if you agree versus if you disagree. If you agree, it could be like, okay, maybe the IRS says, hey, you owe us this penalty. Sometimes taxpayers just say, okay, you know what, I filed my return late. Let's say I filed my partnership tax return late and they're charging me this penalty, right? If you just agreed with that, you could just pay it, right? Now, within this option, right, there are, you could just pay it in full. You could set up, payment arrangement. There's a lot of complexity that goes into this. Like there's installment agreements, there's partial pay installment agreements, there's offers and compromise, right? This is assuming you agree, like, hey, it's fair. I realize I have this late penalty and I'm going to pay it. That's if you agree. I'll come back to this. If you disagree, the IRS will actually even give you instructions on this. Like, for example, they may want you to protest that notice within a certain number of days, or they'll tell you, okay, you can write a letter and you can send it to this address, right? So they'll give you instructions, right? But if you notice, there are there's one thing in common, whether you agree or disagree, and that's that you need to respond. You need to take action, and usually within the time frame, right? So you can't say, okay, I'll get to this in 2 years, right? By then the IRS could be, at your door, sending you hundreds more letters and obviously taking much more severe action against you. So I think the key takeaway from this step is to respond, to take an action, right? Here, this is when you start gathering documentation, depending on what the notice is about, what it's regarding. But I think that in this step, it's also important to actually seriously consider if you need a professional to help you. And let me give you an example. With that partnership notice, if you receive a penalty because you filed the return late, those penalties can escalate very quickly, right? And you could just pay it, or maybe you're a good candidate for first-time penalty abatement, for example, or some other sort of relief, right? Maybe you can, in theory, you can do that on your own, right? But there's some complexity that goes into that. The business needs to be in compliance. It's really about building a case, or maybe you want to go down the avenue of reasonable cause. This can get a lot more complex. You're obviously able to do this and represent yourself, but when we go down those avenues, this is when you may want to consider speaking to a professional, because a professional can give you options. Like when I meet with business taxpayers in these situations, the first thing we're going to do is create a game plan. All right, based on this notice, based on your condition, based on what the IRS is saying, we have the following options available. We can explore them, but more importantly, we can help you execute the options. Like, to give an example, for offers in compromise, right, which is when you can potentially pay the IRS less or settle with the IRS less than what you actually owe. It's not just as simple as asking the IRS for that, right? There's a lot of forms that need to be filled out. There's some financial analysis that needs to take place, right? And communication with the IRS. So a professional can handle that for you. Obviously, you could do it for yourself as well. But again, I've seen time and time again when, because there's a lot of complexity, there's also a lot of room for error, a lot of room for mistakes. So whether you agree or disagree, definitely want to loop in a professional. You want to act fast so that you can respond, right? And one thing to note on this, I think sometimes people don't respond because they realize that there's a lot of time and energy that goes into it, and there's risk involved. Like, hey, maybe you pay the IRS and then you realize that, hey, 3 years later I could have gotten this waived. I could have requested a first time abatement, right? Well, had you worked with a professional, they might have mentioned that to you. They might have done it for you, right? Or again, other people, they don't want to invest the time, and they're like, I'll get to this later, and then they never do. So, and in my case, for example, we can actually handle the communication for clients. If they engage us to do the representation for them, we can handle this response part for them, where we'll make sure that they get the best case outcome possible, and obviously handle that communication with the IRS, right? But again, most important thing is whether you're doing it by yourself or with a professional, you need to take action, you need to respond, and you need to do it in a timely manner. Okay. Step 3 is actually, I would say, one of the most underestimated aspects of this. And what it is okay, let's say you did open the notice, let's say you did take some sort of action, you responded to the IRS. Unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. And I'll give you a couple examples. At this step, what you want to do is you want to, one, maintain your records, everything that you do with IRS, everything that you correspond with them, if you respond to them, if you agree with them, whatever you're doing, you want to maintain your records. But you also want to follow up. And this is very important because I've seen it where, okay, a taxpayer, let's say they agreed with the IRS, they paid the balance, and then they think it's all done, right? They mailed a check, they think it's all done. And then they get another notice saying, hey, now you owe us double because of the interest that's accumulated. And they're like, well, I supposedly paid with them, or I paid them, or I did whatever. And, the check could have gone lost in the mail. Or maybe you filed a form to respond to that notice. The IRS lost it in the mail, right? And then now on their end, the IRS just thinks, oh, this person hasn't taken any action. They haven't responded to us, and they just continue through their collection process, right? So, one, if you have records, if you maintain the records, like if you sent a check in the mail, if you have a copy of that, if you responded in a letter and you have certified mail, you have some sort of record that protects you, right? Because that shows that whether they got it or not, you sent it, right? At that point, it's not your fault, right? The follow-up is key though, because if you just set it and forget it, you're there sleeping at night thinking, hey, this is taken care of, but maybe the IRS doesn't even know you responded, and they're working on how they're going to collect their money, right? But if you follow up, right, then you can check with the IRS and find like, hey, the IRS says they didn't get anything. Well, then, you can take additional steps at that point. But you would only know that if you're following up, if you're calling them, or if you're writing them again, or whatever it may be. Again, and I realize that this is a big ask, especially if you're a business taxpayer, because you're trying to run your business, right? You can't have the additional job of keeping tabs on the IRS and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to. And again, this is where I often see more issues arise because either records haven't been maintained or there isn't follow-up, or both. And again, looping a professional in this case can help, especially if you're in a point in your life where, hey, you don't really have enough time, you're already swamped with what you're doing in your business. Like in my case, when we're representing clients, we handle the communication with the IRS. We handle the follow-up. We're the ones on hold talking to the IRS. We're the ones writing letters. We're the ones, responding to them, and obviously keeping you in the loop so that you don't have to worry or deal with that. But again, somebody has to do it, whether it's the tax professional that's doing it for you or you're doing it. Somebody needs to be maintaining the records, and there definitely needs to be follow-up, because again, that's going to save a lot of headache, and it's going to really make sure that your case can be resolved, right, and be followed through. So again, these have been the 3 essential steps that you need to take if you receive an IRS notice, right? Number 1, you need to open the notice promptly. You need to be proactive. You need to really understand what it is, what the IRS wants from you. And then number 2, understand your options, right? Whether you make that determination by yourself or work with a professional, you want to understand that those options that you have and take action, respond. Whether you agree or disagree, you want to respond. You want to let the IRS know that you're not ignoring them and you're actually looking to work towards a resolution, whether that's paying your bill, whether that's setting up a payment plan, negotiating, whatever it may be, or disagreeing, protesting it, but you need to take action. And then step 3, finally, is going to be to just make sure that you're documenting the communication that you have with the IRS. So like if you're calling them on the phone, that you're documenting the conversation that you had. For example, sometimes when you speak with them, or they should, the employee should give you their employee ID, their number, and you can document that so that you have a record of who you spoke to, the day, the time, and what was the outcome of that conversation. And of course, if you're writing them letters, certified mail, and obviously keeping a record of that. Alternatively, working with a professional who's going to be handling your case, they're going to handle all of this and really give you the peace of mind, because they're going to give you the options. They're going to help prepare, best case for you, really give you the best chance of success. Let's say you want to get penalties waived, or you want to set up, partial payment, some sort of debt settlement for tax debt. The professional is really going to handle all of that for you. But if you're doing it by yourself, again, just more important for you to really keep tabs on this and be proactive. So once again, this was John Hernandez. I'm a tax representation professional. Should you have questions or need additional help with any of this, just know it doesn't have to be, something that you do on your own. I offer a free consultation. I'm always available if you have questions. And again, make sure that you're informed, make sure that you take action, and make sure that you don't let something that could be a simple issue escalate into something so much worse. Thank you, and subscribe for more.